impact that's there. I'm hoping a group of people continue to push about that particular monument and help us move past the argument that somehow, wow, that's a beautiful monument, and the figures seem to be standing with a lot of pride, and after all, they're holding rifles, so how oppressed can they be? We're talking about the Native American representation with the Plains Indian headdress and the African man next to Teddy Roosevelt on a horse, right? And that they're represented in relatively speaking, in the range of horrible caricatures, relatively respectful representations. So the argument among art historians on the board, on the commission, was that, well, no, you look at this image and it really seems to be okay. You know, so what are you talking about? But it kind of is an unresolved debate within the art history field that in many ways is still dominant. So those battles, in some ways, are the battles that are behind the scenes that can make all the difference in the world next time there's a vote for something like that. So I feel those battles are continuing on, and we have to continue to wage them every day in every situation we're in. And perhaps the next time there's another commission that can change. But for me, I'm not waiting for another commission. I mean, I think our work is on an ongoing basis. I'm hoping that we can all come out of these experiences with ongoing projects, which I know everybody here on the panel is involved in.
I would just agree with that. I don't think I have anything to that except, yeah, some of the projects that are nice are kind of crowdsourced things. I mean, one part of Monument Lab is people proposing their own little monument, on pieces of paper. So I think that kind of democratization of the question is really valuable, and I think it can happen pretty easily.
I think one of the really central tenets of the work that I do with the museum on site is that it is participatory on some level, right? And it's site-specific, it's also community-specific, and therefore the participation that it involves is dependent on what it makes sense for that community. And I use the word community in these projects in ways that might make some people feel a little bit weird, because I will talk about, the community that engages in, or that uses Union Square Park. Now, do they think of themselves as a community? Not necessarily, right? And yet they are repeatedly, using the same space, in that same space, seeing each other, whether or not they're registering each other. Right? But the participatory element for me, whatever it is again that makes sense for that community, is partially there because of the impact that it creates. In fact, it's largely there for that, right? That when you are the person who actually physically, reads through and selects a little plaque that has the biography, of a person who you've never heard of before, and who, chances are good, literally no one else in New York City has ever heard of before, right? But here's their story, or a little bit of it, and you choose to make that story something that other people can see by, unerasing them, by writing their name down, and by leaving that plaque there. That then becomes an experience that not only do you remember it every time you walk through Union Square in the future, right, even after it's gone, but you also tell your family about it, you tell your friends about it. When you walk through Union Square with them, I was, that statue, that's a statue of George Washington, I was here once, and, right? Or when the subject of, wouldn't it be ridiculous, there's a slippery slope if you take down those statues of the Confederates, blah, 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 So that's, I think for me, a big part of it.
I think it would be great if we ended with you kind of showing the audience here some of the work that some of the participants did, and showing them how they kind of stylized the memorializations.
I would love to do that. You may have noticed that I did bring in some of the chalkboards. And so one of the things that we, kind of like pre-testing, absolutely knew that people were going to be excited about the chalkboards. What we did not expect was the degree to which they would be just so creative and so personal in how they reacted to the biographies and how they tried to convey that reaction on the on their chalkboards. So this one right here is one of the most touching ones, I think, even though it's been smudged a little bit in transit. It says breachy with a heart next to it, and then in parentheses, plus Ruth, and then a heart next to it. And I have to admit, when I first saw this, I didn't know what that was about, because there were 271 of these biographies. But then when I reread the biography, right, it says Breachy. Breachy was born in 1735 and was forced to labor in multiple roles, from house servant to field laborer on George Washington's plantations. Breachy and his wife Ruth were both dower slaves. This meant that they were considered the legal property of the estate of Martha Washington's deceased first husband. However, they were still under the control of George Washington. But what does it mean when we remember his master over Breachy's own contributions to Washington's success? But the fact here, right, that they pulled out the reference to Ruth and added her onto his plaque. That was just so touching, whoever it was who did that. This one's more like what we were expecting, right? Just someone responding with the name and to their story. Bath, just aesthetically standing out, and yet also reflecting a lot of time and care, right? To make him be noticed, to bring attention to somebody who has not had attention brought to them, right? And then over here, I have a couple more. Betty Davis, a little heart over there. And of course, it was very unusual for enslaved people to have last names, so whenever they did, we wanted to make sure that was included and appreciate the fact that this person did include it. This one was one of the also very interesting ones, and very historians who work with these kinds of documents, I think, would find this one really particularly delightful, because so the plaque itself says alley, right? Because that alley was chosen based on my best guess of what that person's name was, or what that person might have been known as in 1783, based on the records, which is, again, not a very good guess. Allie, also referred to as Alice, Alla, and Alice with two L's, was born in 1776, and her mother's name was Kitty. She worked in the home house, and there are no financial ledgers that inform us, or there are financial ledgers that inform us about midwife charges or clothing provisions. As a dower slave, she was not freed after Washington's death. Why does history overlook her contributions to society? Some of the authors of these plaques are also in the room. And the person who wrote it here was like, wait a second, if you don't know that her name was Allie, I'm not just going to write that. I'm going to write all four names. It's really great. And then I'll just read this one as a final one. Brunswick's birth date is unknown. He was a dower slave who began laboring at Doak Run Plantation in 1760. Most of the records about him pertain to his health and frequent sickness. This is most likely because enslaved people's bodies were deemed a source of income loss or gain. What does it say about our city that Brunswick and other enslaved people have been erased from our memory while his enslaver sits on a pedestal?
Thank you for sharing. And also, I want to thank you for bringing us all together to have this wonderful conversation. Thank you, Marisa and Jack. And thank you all for listening and participating in this discussion on monuments.